Well, hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Decarb Connect podcast. I am so fortunate today to be joined by Emmanuel Brutin, who I'm just going to ask to directly introduce himself rather than my normal fiasco of over-introducing people. So, Emmanuel, tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Good afternoon, Alex, and I'm delighted to be here, and thanks a lot for the invitation. So I am Public Affairs Director for CEMBUREAU. CEMBUREAU is actually the Association for the European Cement Industry. So our members are national cement associations from across the EU and a bit beyond. And in my current role, I'm basically responsible for communicating about our industry, and also I'm in charge of European advocacy. So in terms of my own background, I've been working on energy and climate change issues for about 15 years in Brussels. And I joined CEMBUREAU just over a year ago.
Okay, so I know that your background is not, as you say, it's a broader kind of policy and climate background. Tell us a little bit about, I know you were at National Grid before, and just give us a little bit of the flavour of some of the climate work you've done, and then we'll dig into CEMBUREAU and what your views are from there.
Yes, so I have actually quite a diverse background. So when I started my career, actually in my early years, I work in public affairs for the European rail industry. So really trying to promote the advantages and interests of the European rail transport sector. And following this, indeed, I've been working for National Grid, so representing them in Brussels for the past 6 years. And then my focus was very much about how we can have policies which further the integration of renewable energy into the European energy system. And it's true that when I joined CEMBUREAU over a year ago, it was a very different challenge, because previously I had worked, for industries like rail or like the renewable energy, which were very much in industries which were defended by the European institutions, whereas obviously joining the cement industry, there is a big challenge around industrial decarbonisation and reducing the CO2 emissions from the sector.
So today then, our focus is on the Green Deal. So should we kick off with just your view, your perception of like what has been the reaction to the EU Green Deal from industry? Tell me about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and maybe your own view on it as well.
So, when I joined CEMBUREAU just over a year ago, this was really something I was wondering about. How would the industry react to the Green Deal and to the challenge of carbon neutrality? And as you said just a few seconds ago, I've actually been quite impressed by the reactions from the European cement industry. In fact, from the beginning, when the European Green Deal was published and when carbon neutrality was erected as an objective for the European Union, the position of our boards and of the CEOs of CEMBUREAU was very much to take a proactive position and indeed basically see how the sector could really fit into this objective and really contribute to the European Green Deal. And of course, we will come back to this a bit later when we discuss our carbon neutrality roadmap. But that's a very important document which we published just a few months after the European Green Deal. And I think this trend towards proactive positioning and very positive reactions from the industry translated into CEMBUREAU's work, but also in the work of our member companies. So, if you look at what happened in the past year within the industry, you see a tremendous amount of change. You've seen all the big, major European cement players adopting CO2 emission reduction targets by 2030 or 2050. You've seen the launching of new products. Many of our members have launched, low carbon cement, low carbon concrete as well. And you also see this in terms of the pace of investments has also fastened to an extent which honestly surprised me. So if you look at carbon capture, for instance, today, our members are really investing very significant amounts of money towards this technology. So on the whole, I was really, really glad actually to see that the industry was being so proactive.
Obviously, as you know, the podcast gets a sort of fairly international listener base. I know everyone listening to this, there's of course, everyone's going to know the Green Deal and its basic premise, but can you just highlight like what are the sort of, the main areas that present a challenge, but, one that the industry is up for, but where do you see the main challenges coming from in what the EU has laid out so far?
Well, I mean, clearly the biggest challenge, especially when it comes to the European cement industry, will be to be reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. And that's a very, very ambitious objective from the European Union. It doesn't mean that every single sector will have to be carbon neutral by 2050, because we also have some carbon sinks like forest absorbing CO2, for instance. But however, it means a very strong effort will be expected from all the sectors. And this, I think, if you look at cement, which accounts today, I mean, you have different figures, but it's between 6 and 8% of worldwide CO2 emissions. In itself, it's a very significant challenge. But I think you also have very strong opportunities for the cement industry. So a big point of the European Green Deal is to promote a circular economy. And I think we'll also come back to this a bit later, but the European cement industry is very well positioned actually to play a central role in this objective.
Okay. All right. Well, we've already referenced a little bit the carbon neutrality roadmap that CEMBUREAU had developed. And if I remember rightly, we had obviously had our brief chat before the podcast. I think you were saying that the first version was drawn up in 2012. Is that right?
It was actually in 2013. So
sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So we had our first version in 2013, and it was looking at an 80% CO2 emission reduction by 2050. And this was subsequently updated in 2018. But anyway, what we've done with our roadmap, which was now published in May 2020, was really two things. I mean, firstly, we wanted to look at this European Green Deal objective of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. So we're really looking at, how can we contribute to this objective? But the other thing which we've done, which is also very important, is we've really taken a full life cycle approach. So, we've looked not only at reducing CO2 emissions from clinker and from cement, but also down the value chain. So, when cement is turned into concrete, how can you have further CO2 emission savings? And when concrete is used in buildings, and when concrete is recycled. So we really looked at the full value chain. Now, just to take you through very quickly some of the key findings of our roadmap, because I think these are quite important. The first one is in terms of technologies, carbon capture, use and storage will remain very, very important for our sector. It's about 42% of our emission savings between now and 2050. And you see currently quite a lot of projects happening on CCUS from across the industry. What our roadmap identifies, though, is one challenge that as a sector we will face in the future is, even when you're installing CCUS technology on your cement kiln, what will you do with the CO2 you capture? And this CO2, you can either reuse it. So, we have wonderful projects in Europe currently, which, consist in capturing the CO2 from a cement kiln, mixing it with hydrogen to produce synthetic fuel. So that's a possible example. But if we're not, reusing this CO2, we will at least need to transport it, and this will be a challenge for the sector to have this CO2 transport infrastructure. That's really something where we think, national and EU governments should strongly support us.
Well, can I just ask you on that point? Are you hearing much so far about a kind of a real plan for CO2 transportation in Europe?
So I think some projects are indeed coming together. So, for instance, at the end of this year, the European Commission will review the regulation on trans-European energy networks, which does feature actually some dedicated funding for cross-border CO2 pipelines. You also have real projects taking shape. So, for instance, the Northern Lights project connecting Norway and some other Scandinavian countries through CO2 transport is also happening. But that's, I mean, as I told you, it will be a major challenge for our industry, precisely because you have over 200 cement kilns all across Europe, and they're quite spread, quite evenly across the EU territory. So some of them may be in in an industrial hub where they could share CO2 infrastructure with a nearby steel factory, for instance. But however, some cement kilns are quite deep in the countryside actually, and then the situation is a bit more challenging.
Yeah, I think I heard about that. My team heard about that a little bit during our research phase for the festival in January as well, with people saying it's all very well if you are based somewhere within reach of, I don't know, Porthos in the Netherlands or Teesside here in the UK, then even though those projects are some way off completion, there's still the prospect that you might be able to find a way to link into it. But if you're based in right in the middle of Central Europe, or I don't know, even in Rugby in the UK, and you're not near one of the clusters, that it's not as simple as people maybe think to kind of to complete that circle of what, not only A, to extract the CO2, but B, do something with it. Okay, so anyway, I interrupted you. That was kind of element one of the roadmap. So talk me through to the next stage.
Our second key finding is that actually by using non-recyclable waste and biomass waste as opposed to fossil fuels, we could be saving significant amounts of energy and CO2. It's actually up to 15% of our emission reduction between now and 2050. And here it's fundamentally different than CCUS. So there's no technological constraint at all. Already today, a cement kiln can work using 70-80% non-recyclable waste and biomass waste. So we are actually already phasing out fossil fuels. I mean, if you take the European average, today we're at 48% usage of non-recyclable waste and biomass waste, and 52% fossil fuels. But there's no technological constraint in terms of us increasing this 48% to much higher threshold, like 80 or 90. In fact, it's really purely a policy and regulatory issue. And here's a challenge we're facing is, in many European countries, landfilling waste is still a common practice, whereas actually we would argue that instead of, landfilling this waste, which is causing CO2 emissions, this waste could be redirected, for instance, to cement kilns. So it is really, again, I stress it's not a technological issue. We can absorb, much higher shares of non-recyclable waste. It's more really a matter of how do you design policies that really incentivize the use of non-recyclable waste in cement kilns.
So in that first example of CCUS, which we do hear increasing amounts about in Europe, I think the issue there is somewhat technology at scale, but probably mostly how on earth you finance it. And so for kind of biomass, for the recycling of waste, purely to do with policy, you would say?
It is absolutely purely to do with policy, and there, we are active at the European level. We want the institutions to really recognize the importance of co-processing in the European cement industry. We also want the EU to disincentivize landfill where it can. There is, for instance, you have the upcoming review of the EU Waste Shipment Directive, and something we really hope is, this occasionally makes the news, but some European countries are exporting waste in countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, and I think we should just stop this, and this waste, where possible, should be redirected towards cement factories, because we really offer a solution for this.
So any other elements then? So we've got our waste and the treatment of waste. We've got carbon capture. What else is on your kind of checklist on the roadmap?
So I have a couple of additions. I mean, the third really important finding is on low carbon cement. So today, some of our members are already putting on the market low carbon cements. Even some of them are actually putting on the market carbon neutral concrete. So it's not really carbon neutral per se, it's actually carbon neutral through offsetting. But nonetheless, these products exist, and they're accessible to construction companies on the market. But what we see today is okay. I mean, these products have a certain success, but this success could be much more higher. And it's true that today, if you're a construction company, you don't really have massive incentives to use a low carbon cement as opposed to just a regular cement. So I think, this is something policymakers will need to look at. It's an area which is just being developed, really, as I told you, it's really an emerging market for our members, and quite a promising one. But I think that's really something that policymakers will need to look at, is how do we incentivize consumers, which in our case, are mostly large European construction companies. How do we incentivize them to use low carbon cements?
That's interesting, because where a lot of the policy that we talk about through Decarb Connect really is like at European level or a national level, it's about the US policy system. Something that type of policy you're referring to could be local. It could be a council-led incentive. It could be local government and more local-led initiatives about both, I guess, domestic housing that's being built or infrastructure projects. Are you seeing any kind of movement in kind of more regional or local policy, or just not yet?
I think this is really burgeoning, but I am aware of certain projects where, it's more, municipality wants to build a specific building, let's say a new museum, for instance, and they really want it to be zero carbon. Then indeed they would procure this carbon neutral concrete for that specific purpose. But I think, your comment is interesting, also because public procurement can be a way actually to incentivize those low carbon cements, and that's something I think the European Commission will be looking at. There's a due to revise the EU green public procurement rules, so I assume this could actually be part of the scope.
I mean, I'm just thinking it's all kind of in the UK news at the moment, obviously about our kind of big rail investment that we're making here. Also the kind of expansion of Heathrow, and that's just on my, those two are on my mind because it's what I hear in my national news. But I mean, if those projects were geared to or rewarded the use of low carbon product, then that starts to make a big shift, because there's no reason other than financial, right, why construction or big projects wouldn't use these products.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, the reason is financial. But even then, I mean, that's also, it's also an interesting thought to see that actually, when you look at the cost of construction product in a building, is actually not so huge as compared to other costs. So that's also something to factor in. That indeed, if you're using a lower carbon cement, probably it will be more expensive than a regular cement. But overall, those costs, as I understand it, are not enormous if in the bigger cycle of things.
Okay, and then the last chunk of your roadmap.
Yes, the last chunk is also very important. It's towards creating a level playing field, and I think we'll come back to this in a moment when we discuss carbon border mechanisms. But in a nutshell, we are very clear that if we want to realize all these investments in the carbon neutrality roadmap, we can't be in a situation where European cement companies are constantly undercut by imports from third countries where there would be no emission trading scheme or no way to account for the cost of CO2. So that's really the last finding, but one which is really, really important if we want to decarbonize, if we want to be successful towards carbon neutrality. We need European players and also non-European players exporting on the EU market to pay for the cost of carbon, and we need that level playing field to happen.
And at the moment, what's the state of play with that? I mean, I guess there is, because the Green Deal is sort of still new and still coming to place. Is there no kind of mechanism for managing that right now?
No, so today, I mean, there is a mechanism. So European companies are on the EU emission trading scheme, but to reflect the fact that non-European countries are not part of the ETS, the European company do receive a degree of free allocation. So we don't pay for all our CO2 emissions, if you like, we only pay for part of them. But nonetheless, you still have a situation where, whilst we pay for a share of our carbon cost, all the EU companies, from all the non-European companies are not paying for any of these costs when they're exporting to the EU market. And so that's partly the reason why, as part of the European Green Deal, the Commission came up with this idea of having a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and that's something which they are currently progressing. So you just had a public consultation which was closed a few days ago, actually last week, and now what we're expecting is that the European Commission will develop their legislative proposals, and that they will publish these by June 2021. So, and as CEMBUREAU, as I told you, we do support the idea of carbon border mechanism, because we think we need a level playing field on carbon in order to be able to decarbonize our industry. And what we've seen in the space of just a few years really is quite a significant evolution. So very very significant increase of imports from countries bordering the European Union, such as for instance Turkey, but also Northern Africa, Russia, and Belarus. Coupled with a very significant increase as well as in terms of installed capacity in these countries. So we do defend carbon border adjustment mechanism. I mean, what is important is, of course, the devil, as in any EU legislation, the devil will really be in the details. So there are a number of principles that we highlight. I mean, I won't go too far in the details, but what we say is carbon border adjustment should coexist with free allocation under the EU ETS. They should be WTO compatible. They should have a wide sectoral scope. So I won't bore you with this, but we highlighted a number of principles. But then let me just emphasize the positive thing is we just conducted a study through PwC, which we started to share with EU Commission officials last week. And so this study looks at the potential benefits of carbon border adjustments in the European cement industry. And notably, what is really interesting is that, according to PwC, if the carbon border adjustments are well designed, then they can actually reduce overall CO2 emissions, and they can also improve global social welfare. So that's a very, very important finding.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about that link. What does that mean? How does that work? The link between global social and a kind of a regional carbon. What's the link there?
So the link, I mean, what PwC have done is basically they calculated the situation of our industry in the coming years between 2020 and 2030, and how we would be facing a risk of carbon leakage. When carbon leakage, happens whereby European production is displaced in neighboring countries where most often this results in higher CO2 emissions because those neighboring countries are not subject to the same CO2 constraints. And so based on this, basically PwC was able to devise, how much CO2 savings could a carbon border adjustment bring. And we've also asked them to look at, okay, what would be the impact on employment in Europe? And again, the impact of a carbon border mechanism is positive in this respect.
That's the kind of the lie of the land for carbon border adjustment and carbon border mechanisms. But in very practical terms for me, the layman, what might that look like? So is that, were you saying that it's an addition to the ETS and would be sort of part of that, or did you just mean it was going to be similar in its the way that it would work?
So this is still, under consideration by the Commission. But one of the options, for instance, is to have an ETS mirror system. So the exact same way that EU companies have to surrender CO2 allowances, then we would impose the same thing on importers. I think the key rule is the European industry is not asking for double protection, and we don't want any form of double protection. But I think the bottom line is, if European suppliers are paying, be it 10 euros per ton of CO2 or 30 euros per ton of CO2, or maybe tomorrow, if the ETS jumps the roof, maybe 80 euros per ton of CO2, we would like basically importers to pay the exact same price. So it's really about, having a level playing field. It's not about having double protection. It's not about protectionism at all.
All right then. Well, let's move on. But actually, it kind of brings us back to something you were talking about early on, which is that one of the kind of the tone of the Green Deal, if you like, has this big emphasis, not just tones, the detail of it has a big emphasis on circular economy. What do you see the cement sector contributing? Everyone talks about cradle to cradle as being the kind of key phrase of circular economy. So tell me a bit about what do you see as the potential for the cement sector to really get involved in that?
Actually, I think the European cement industry is really at the heart of circular economy. And if you look at upstream, and that's what I already mentioned, we're already today using very, very large quantities of waste coming from different European cities or different European industries, which we are using in our kilns, and we're using them, not only to phase out fossil fuel, but also whatever we put into the kiln actually becomes part of cement and of our final products. So there's no residue, if you like, when we're using this non-recyclable waste. So that's really our key presence upstream. And then downstream, if you look at cement's end product, which is concrete. Concrete is actually a fully recyclable material. So it's not recyclable into new concrete, but it's recyclable into new aggregates, so which you can then use to produce concrete. Or it's also recyclable in in my home country, France, they use it quite a lot to recycle it into aggregates for roads, basically. So we have a product which today is, and again, I stress 100% recyclable, and which is made, through the production of cement, which is made partly from other materials. So I think, I'm not convinced there are many other, stronger examples of products which are so much at the heart of circular economy. I mean, yes, we have the example of glass, which can be made of recycled glass. But we don't have so many examples of an industry like cement, which is using waste from other industries, bring it into the production process, and then at the end of the day to have a final product which itself is recyclable. But now, I mean, we already covered a bit the idea of co-processing and using alternative fuels. But as I told you, that there are different policy measures to support this. When you look at the recyclability of concrete, there is also a big chunk of effort, I think, that could be made to ensure that we recycle all the concrete which is available. We had an event a couple of weeks ago in the European industry, and one of my members said, when I see a building about to be demolished, I see potential raw materials for my business. And I found this really, really interesting. And I think we need to support this spirit of really looking at how can we do more to recycle concrete.
So what is so if that's the case is, as you say, it's already 100% recyclable. What is the reason for it not being then? Is it purely economic, or is it that value chain, somehow those links don't exist? What's the barrier right now, like this year, next year? What prevents that from happening now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think some countries have better policies than others on this. I mean, again, I think my home country, France, is a good example of systematically.
Very biased, Emmanuel, and I'm worried about the amount of French flag waving. But no, carry on.
So it is no, but France is systematically trying to recover actually the used concrete. I think the big issue is there's no real incentive again for a construction or demolition company to reuse it. It's just as simple as this. And that's a bit what we're lacking today.
So probably a combination of policy, but also just that piece, that valuation of the rubble, bluntly, kind of making that clear that there is an opportunity to be had there.
I think that's right, and it is, and when you look at circular economy, it is actually a lot about exactly valuing, in fact, valuing waste properly, and that's a bit what I told you with our issue of all these non-recyclable waste being sent to landfill as opposed to cement kilns. Is some stakeholders sometimes have very little incentive not to landfill stuff. And so I think it's really about providing this right incentive for people to reuse and recycle.
Well, then, in a sort of slight shift, then, so we've talked about the roadmap, we've talked about what circular economy is and certainly means within the cement sector. So more broadly then, when you look at your own industry, so this is now back, looking back on all your cement sector members, what do you think is going to be important to making decarbonisation not just stick, it's kind of a clunky word I've been using, but really become central to how companies think? What's going to need to happen within those businesses within your sector?
Well, I mean, firstly, I'm really glad you're asking this question, because I think it's extremely important to create this buy-in, and in particular, create the buy-in from employees. So I don't have any magical solution, but I think the role of every one of us has changed actually, and this in a way is probably thanks also to the activism of Greta Thunberg and of the different climate change movements. We now all have the feeling, and we are now all part of this move towards decarbonization. And I think many leaders in the sector, I mean, if you ask to some of our CEOs, but also even at a lower level, so somebody like me, we all feel we have a responsibility to make this happen. And I think it's really about conveying this need for change. realizing that climate change is no longer really for any of us a very distant threat. I mean, okay, maybe we will deal with it, but it will impact our kids, our grandkids, and I think, in a way, we're all becoming parts really of of this shift, and we all have a responsibility to make this shift happen. Now, I mean, how this happens in different companies, I think it's really through embedding sustainability as much as possible, in all corners of the companies. I mean, I'm not very keen on quoting specific members of CEMBUREAU, but some of them, for instance, have appointed a chief environmental specialist within their company, really to ensure that this need for sustainability is reflected in all their activities. So that's an example. I think the key would also get to be the buy-in from all the employees, and here I think in the cement industry, again we have potentially an asset, because the cement industry is an industry where employees used to be extremely proud because they're providing what is unquestionably the best construction product material. I'm being a bit biased there again, but I think it is. But the past years have been more challenging because the CO2 emissions from the industry have been exposed in media as well. And I think a way for us and for our employees to also regain our pride is to say, okay, not only are we providing this fantastic construction material, but on top of this, we're helping to decarbonize it on a day-to-day basis, and eventually we will provide a product which is carbon neutral. And I think this is that's a really exciting task at hand. And the last thing which I wanted to say, which is more a personal reflection on my own work, is I've been in Brussels now for 15 years, as I told you, and I can tell you 10 years ago when the EU was coming up with new climate change objectives, some European industries, so I'm not quoting cement in particular, but some European industries will be saying, oh no, but this EU target is really too high. We can't meet it. It's going to be too tough. So therefore, our CO2 ambitions should not be that high. I think nobody is really saying this anymore. I think things have changed now. Today, in practice, what we're fighting for is, okay, we know that there is a clear trajectory towards carbon neutrality. What we need is really, supporting measures to help us making all these decarbonization investments. So I think things have really, radically shifted in Brussels. Some years ago, you had, industries fighting against too ambitious climate change objectives. Now, I think broadly, everybody accepts that, science is key behind defining the objective. It's really about setting up the right political framework and the right, framework for industrial investments to allow decarbonization to happen.
Okay, well, last question for you then. So we've obviously talked about your roadmap. We've talked about this view on what's needed from industry and the kind of perspective of industry. Tell me, like, if you were going to make your little wish list of one thing that you wish industry would crack this year, one thing from the technology companies, one thing from policy, one from investment, what's on that wish list for you of things that you think, I want to see this issue nailed in the next year or 18 months?
So I think on the side of policymakers, it would really be a global level playing field on carbon, because we need to take the populations and European citizens and workers with us on this journey to decarbonization. And I don't think you can achieve this if it results in closure of companies. So yeah, I think we will need this from policymakers. From our industry, I mean, what I would love to see, and in this respect, I'm quite happy because I see it happening, is a lot of investment in decarbonization technologies. And I think there's a lot to be proud of, and especially on a technology like carbon capture, use and storage, where, as far as I can see, the European cement industry is really becoming, the leading sector in terms of implementation of this technology. And now, in terms of technology providers, yeah, I mean, what I will say would sound very obvious coming from, the representative of an industry using this technology. But of course, we want, very good products at a cheaper price, and therefore we're looking forward, especially to CCUS being, fully investable and scalable. And I'm aware a lot of good technology companies are making tremendous effort on that road.
And investors?
Investors, I mean, so the framework for investors will change quite a lot, because the EU, I mean, we haven't touched this yet, but the EU are just finalizing the taxonomy requirements, whereby they will actually indicate to investments to investors what can qualify as green investment or not. What we expect from investors is really, on the basis of the EU taxonomy rules, to support the European cement industry. Cement is actually included in those taxonomy rules. So it's a very good opportunity, I think, for investors to really support the investments in our industries that will lead to decarbonisation.
Emmanuel, thank you so much. Mostly for giving me your time, but also good, detailed answers, which is what we love when it comes to policy, because I think policy has the ability to clarify or totally obfuscate. And I would hazard a guess that for some people, the Green Deal has done both, but I think that was a really useful overview. So thank you. And to everyone that's listening, please tune in again. We'll be talking with the Global Carbon Capture Institute soon, and also have a number of other industry interviews lined up. But for now, Emmanuel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.